Commander Jake Mitchell wiped sweat from his forehead as he stared at the glowing blue hologram floating in front of him. The bridge of the UES Thunderstrike hummed with quiet energy, but right now it felt like the most important place in the entire galaxy. The emergency message kept playing over and over, crackling with static from its long journey through space. The voice belonged to someone from the R'Lani colony on Vega Prime, and Jake could hear the fear in every word. These people were dying. The Hagran Empire had surrounded their beautiful world with 50 massive warships, each one bigger than a city block back on Earth. The Hagrans were known throughout the galaxy for one thing. They never left survivors. Jake had seen pictures of Vega Prime before. It looked like something from a fairy tale, with cities made of crystal that caught sunlight and threw rainbows across floating gardens that drifted through the clouds. The R'Lani people were gentle creatures who looked almost like tall, graceful deer walking on two legs. They had never hurt anyone in their entire history. They didn't even know how to make weapons. But that was exactly why the Hagrans had chosen them. These alien bullies always picked on the weakest targets first. They would steal everything valuable from the planet, then turn it into a wasteland just because they could. Jake had seen what happened to other worlds the Hagrans visited. Nothing but burned ground and empty cities. The Galactic Council meeting had been a disaster. Jake remembered watching the live feed earlier that day. Representatives from dozens of different alien species sat around arguing while people died. Some wanted to send help, but said it would take months to get their fleets ready. Others were too scared of the Hagrans to even try. A few actually suggested just letting Vega Prime fall to save their own skins. That made Jake's blood boil. Back on Earth, when someone was in trouble, you didn't sit around having meetings about it. You helped them. Communication Officer Lisa Parker turned in her chair to face him. She was young, maybe 25, with short red hair and freckles across her nose. Lisa had joined the crew 6 months ago, fresh out of the academy. Jake had watched her grow from a nervous rookie into one of his most trusted officers. "Sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "the council is asking if we'll take the mission." Jake could see what this meant to her. Lisa had grown up on a farm in Kansas before joining the space service. She understood what it meant to protect innocent people, but she also knew the math. The Thunderstrike carried 200 crew members. They were good people, brave people, but they were still just one ship against 50 enemy warships. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. There was Tommy Rodriguez at the weapons station, a tough kid from Texas who could hit a target the size of a dinner plate from 1,000 miles away. Amanda Foster sat at the pilot controls, her hands already moving over the navigation computer, like she was planning their route. These people had volunteered to serve out here on the dangerous edge of known space, far from Earth's blue skies and safe harbors. They all knew what this mission meant. Most of them would probably die trying to save people they had never met. But Jake could see it in their faces. They were going to do it anyway. That was what made humans different from most other species in the galaxy. When someone needed help, humans didn't ask if it was safe or profitable. They just helped. "Set course for Vega Prime," Jake ordered, his voice carrying clearly across the bridge. "Maximum speed." Amanda's fingers flew over her controls. "Course plotted, sir. We can be there in 18 hours if I push the engines hard." "Do it," Jake said. The Thunderstrike turned toward distant stars, carrying 200 humans, toward what everyone else thought was certain death. The briefing room on the Thunderstrike had never felt this heavy before. Jake stood at the front, looking out at the faces of his senior officers. The holographic display behind him showed the cold, hard facts that everyone needed to hear. 50 Hagran warships formed a perfect circle around Vega Prime, like vultures waiting for their prey to die. Each of those enemy ships was twice the size of the Thunderstrike. Their weapons could punch holes through solid rock from thousands of miles away. The Hagran Empire had conquered 47 different worlds in the past 50 years, and they had never lost a single battle. Not once. Jake clicked to the next slide, showing the timeline. The nearest Galactic Council fleet is 3 weeks away, he said quietly. The Relani people don't have 3 days, let alone 3 weeks. The room was so quiet, you could hear the soft hum of the ship's air recycling system. Jake watched his officers process the information. These were smart people. They could all do the math. 1 ship against 50 was not a fight, it was suicide. But then Marine Captain Tom Bradley leaned forward in his chair. Tom was built like a brick wall, with scars on his hands from a dozen different battles. He had grown up in the rough neighborhoods of Detroit, where you learned early that sometimes you had to stand up to bullies, even when they were bigger than you. "When do we leave, sir?" Tom asked, like Jake had just told him they were going to. "The grocery store instead of certain death." Pilot Amanda Foster stretched her arms above her head, making her knuckles crack loudly in the silence. Amanda was from Alaska, where her family had taught her to fly crop dusters when she was barely tall enough to reach the controls. She had joined the space service because she wanted to see what was beyond Earth's atmosphere, but she had stayed because she loved the challenge of impossible flights. "Those Hagrans picked the wrong planet to mess with," Amanda said with a grin that would have scared most aliens. "I've been looking for an excuse to see what this old bucket can really do." Chief Engineer Mike Thompson nodded slowly from the back of the room. Mike was the kind of guy who could fix anything with spare parts and determination. His team had kept the Thunderstrike running through asteroid storms, solar flares, and attacks from space pirates. He had gray hair at 35 because his job involved constantly preventing catastrophic explosions, but he loved every minute of it. "My team can push the engines past red line if needed," Mike said in his calm, steady voice. "We've done worse than this before." Jake felt something warm spread through his chest as he looked around the room. Not one person had asked about the odds. Nobody had suggested they wait for backup or try to negotiate with the Hagrans. They all understood what was at stake. Innocent people were going to die if someone didn't help them. Other species in the galaxy called humans Deathworlders, because Earth was such a dangerous place to live. Most planets had gentle weather and friendly animals. Earth had hurricanes, earthquakes, poisonous snakes, and bears that could tear a person in half. Humans had survived by being tougher and more stubborn than anything else on their world. But that wasn't the real reason other aliens feared humans. They were afraid because humans had this crazy habit of protecting complete strangers, even when it meant risking their own lives. Most intelligent species looked out for themselves first. Humans looked out for everyone else first, then worried about themselves later. Dr. Betty Wilson, the ship's medical officer, raised her hand. "How many casualties should I prepare for, Commander?" Jake met her eyes. "All of us, Doc, but we're going anyway." Betty nodded and made notes on her tablet. She was already planning how to treat injuries in zero gravity while under enemy fire. "We launch in 6 hours, Jake announced, standing up straighter. "Get some rest, check your equipment, and call home if you need to. We're going to show the galaxy what Deathworlders can do when someone threatens innocent people." The officers filed out of the briefing room, already planning and preparing. Jake stayed behind for a moment, watching the display show those 50 enemy ships. Tomorrow, they would learn why humans were the most feared warriors in the galaxy. The Thunderstrike tore through the fabric of space and suddenly appeared right in the middle of 50 enemy warships. It was like jumping into a shark tank wearing a meat suit. Jake had ordered Amanda to drop them out of hyperspace as close as possible to the Hagran blockade, and she had delivered exactly what he asked for. The view on the main screen was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Massive gray warships stretched out in every direction, each one bristling with weapon ports and armored plating. They looked like floating cities built for one purpose, destroying everything in their path. The gentle blue glow of Vega Prime hung in the distance behind them, looking impossibly small and fragile. For about 2 seconds, nobody moved. The Hagrans were probably staring at their sensors, wondering if some crazy human ship had actually just appeared in the middle of their formation. Jake used those 2 seconds to take a deep breath and remember why they were here. Then all hell broke loose. Red energy beams erupted from dozens of enemy ships at once, turning the black void of space into a deadly light show. The weapons fire came from every direction, creating a web of destruction that should have vaporized the Thunderstrike in the first few seconds. The sound of alarms filled the bridge as warning lights flashed everywhere. Evasive maneuvers. Jake shouted over the noise, gripping the armrests of his captain's chair. Amanda Foster's training kicked in immediately. Her hands moved across the control panel faster than most people could follow, and the Thunderstrike suddenly twisted sideways like a dancer avoiding a punch. The ship's hull groaned under the stress as she pushed it through turns that would have torn apart most other vessels. What made this possible was something that Hagrans didn't understand about human engineering. Most alien ships were built for comfort and efficiency. Human ships were built to survive the worst possible situations. Every bolt, every weld, every circuit had been designed by people who grew up on a planet that was constantly trying to kill them. The artificial gravity system flickered and wavered as Amanda used the ship itself as a weapon. She spun the Thunderstrike like a top, presenting their thickest armor plating to incoming fire, while keeping the enemy guessing about where they would go next. G-forces that would have knocked most aliens unconscious barely made the human crew blink. Hull breach on Deck 7. Mike Thompson's voice crackled over the communication system. His engineering team was already running toward the damage, carrying repair tools and emergency patches. We're venting atmosphere fast. In any normal situation, losing air meant death. Ships needed atmosphere to keep their crews alive, and a hull breach was every spacer's worst nightmare. But Jake had grown up watching old movies about fighter pilots and submarine crews. People who turned disasters into advantages. Use it, Jake ordered calmly. Emergency thrust. Mike didn't even question the command. He opened the breach wider, letting the escaping air shoot out like a rocket engine. The Thunderstrike lurched forward just as a massive plasma torpedo streaked through the space where they had been a split second before. The torpedo was the size of a school bus and packed with enough energy to crack a mountain in half. On the bridge of the Hagran flagship, Admiral Krex stared at his tactical display with growing confusion. The human ship was moving in ways that defied every rule of space combat he had learned in 40 years of war. They were using damage as propulsion, spinning like a child's toy, while somehow managing to hit his outer ships with precision weapons fire. "How are they still alive?" demanded his tactical officer, a scarred veteran who had conquered dozens of worlds. Krex watched as another of his ships took heavy damage from the impossible human vessel. The Thunderstrike was smaller than his smallest escort, but it was fighting like a wounded animal backed into a corner. Every time his ships managed to score a hit, the humans found some way to turn the damage into an advantage. "They're not fighting like any civilized species," Krex muttered, watching his formation start to break apart. "They're fighting like savages." What he didn't understand was that humans weren't savages, they were survivors. Every tactic the crew used had been learned through generations of people who refused to give up, no matter how bad things got. They were the descendants of folks who had crossed oceans in wooden boats and climbed mountains just to see what was on the other side. The battle had been going on for 6 brutal hours, and the Thunderstrike looked like it had been through a meat grinder. Scorch marks covered the hull where enemy weapons had found their target. Chunks of armor plating drifted away into space, leaving ugly wounds in the ship's side. Warning lights flashed red throughout the corridors, and the smell of burned circuits hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. But somehow, impossibly, they were still fighting. Tom Bradley led his Marine squad through sections of the ship that should have been uninhabitable. Toxic smoke from damaged life support systems made the air thick and poisonous. Radiation from a cracked reactor core was leaking through the walls at levels that would cook most aliens in minutes. The temperature had dropped so low that frost was forming on the metal surfaces. None of this stopped the Marines. They moved through the damaged areas like ghosts, wearing basic breathing masks and ignoring the danger around them. Tom's team had grown up in places like the Nevada desert and the frozen plains of Montana, where the weather alone could kill you if you weren't careful. A little radiation and bad air was just another day at the office. Power coupling on deck. 9 is fried, Tom reported over his radio, his voice muffled by his mask. We're splicing an emergency backup now. His Marines worked with steady hands despite the chaos around them. These were people whose ancestors had built railroads across mountains and oil rigs in the middle of hurricanes. When something needed fixing, they fixed it. When something needed defending, they defended it. It was that simple. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Jenny Walsh was performing miracles with limited supplies. Her small medical team was treating crew members who should have been in intensive care units back on Earth. But instead of lying in hospital beds, these wounded humans were insisting on returning to their duty stations. Oxygen levels at 30% and dropping, Jenny announced over the ship's communication system. Most species would have been unconscious by now. Humans from Earth were used to thin air. Their ancestors had lived in mountains and high altitudes for thousands of years. Petty Officer Rick Davis sat on her examination table with a piece of metal shrapnel sticking out of his shoulder. Jenny had just finished bandaging around it because pulling it out would cause too much bleeding. "Doc, I need to get back to my post," Rick said, trying to stand up. "The weapons array won't calibrate itself." "You have a punctured lung and possible internal bleeding," Jenny replied, gently pushing him back down. "So did my grandfather when he stormed the beaches in World War II," Rick said with a weak grin. "He kept going, and so will I." This was happening all over the ship. Humans with broken bones were still manning their stations. People with concussions were making critical repairs. They fought on with injuries that would have killed most other species, or at least put them out of commission for weeks. Meanwhile, Chief Engineer Mike Thompson and his team were performing the most dangerous job of all. They were outside the ship, floating in the vacuum of space while enemy weapons fire streaked past them like deadly shooting stars. They wore bulky spacesuits and used welding torches to patch holes in the hull, working by the light of explosions and laser beams. Most intelligent species considered working in open space during combat to be pure insanity. The risk of being hit by debris or weapon fire was enormous. But humans had been doing dangerous jobs in hostile environments since they first learned to make tools. Their ancestors had repaired oil rigs during storms and built skyscrapers on narrow steel beams, hundreds of feet above the ground. "Hole patch complete on Section 12, Mike reported calmly, as if he were fixing a leaky pipe in his basement, instead of welding metal plates while dodging enemy fire in the void of space. Far below on Vega Prime, the R'Lani people watched the battle through their natural telepathic abilities. They could sense the emotions and thoughts of the human crew, and what they felt made them weep tears of wonder and gratitude. Most species fought to survive. These humans were fighting to protect people they had never met, on a world they had never seen. The R'Lani could feel their determination, their refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. Elder Cinna, the oldest and wisest of the R'Lani, shared her thoughts with the others watching. "They're not just fighting for us," she whispered in amazement. "They're protecting us like we're their own children, their own family." The battle was starting to turn in humanity's favor, but everyone knew the hardest part was still coming. The massive Hagran flagship slowly moved into position like a mountain floating through space. The destroyer of worlds was 3 miles long and packed with enough firepower to turn entire planets into rubble. Its main cannon was the size of a city block, and everyone in the galaxy knew what it could do. Just 6 months ago, Admiral Krex had used it to crack open the moon of Centauri, 7. As a warning to rebels. Now that terrible weapon was pointed directly at the battered Thunderstrike. On the bridge, sparks flew from damaged control panels while emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. The crew had been fighting for almost 8 hours straight, and they looked like they had been through a war, which, Jake supposed, they had. Amanda Foster wiped blood from a cut on her forehead and stared at her tactical display with the focused intensity of a chess master studying the board. Her uniform was torn and dirty, but her hands were still steady on the controls. She had been flying them through impossible maneuvers for hours, but Jake could see the exhaustion starting to show. "Jake," she said quietly, her voice barely audible, over the sound of alarms and crackling electricity. "We're not going to make it through their shields with conventional weapons. That thing's got armor plating thicker than our entire ship." Jake looked around at his crew, these amazing people who had followed him into what everyone else called certain death. Communications officer Lisa Parker was still at her station, even though her left arm hung useless at her side. Weapons officer Tommy Rodriguez had a nasty burn across his cheek but kept firing at enemy targets with deadly accuracy. Dr. Jenny Walsh moved between crew members like an angel of mercy, treating wounds and keeping people fighting when they should have collapsed. Hours ago, these people had trusted him with their lives, and now it looked like he was going to get them all killed. But that was okay. They had saved millions of innocent Relani people, and that made everything worth it. Then Jake remembered something his grandfather had told him years ago, back when he was just a kid growing up in Ohio. His grandfather had been a Marine in World War II, and he used to say that Americans didn't win wars because they were stronger or smarter than everyone else. They won because when things got really bad, they did crazy things that nobody expected. "Then we do this the human way," Jake said, feeling a crazy smile spread across his face. "Tom, prepare boarding parties. Amanda, plot a ramming course." The bridge went quiet for just a moment. Even his own crew thought he had finally lost his mind. You didn't ram a ship 50 times bigger than your own. That was suicide with extra steps. But Amanda's fingers were already dancing across her controls. "Ramming course plotted," she said with the same tone she might use to order coffee. "This is going to hurt." "It always does," Jake replied. The Thunderstrike turned toward the massive enemy flagship and accelerated like a bullet fired from a gun. Every remaining engine roared to life, pushing the damaged ship faster than it had ever gone before. Admiral Krex watched in disbelief as the tiny human vessel charged directly at his mighty dreadnought. At the last possible second, Amanda rolled their ship sideways. The Thunderstrike smashed into the side of the Destroyer of Worlds like a hammer, hitting an anvil, but instead of bouncing off, it stuck. Tom Bradley and his Marines were ready for the impact, and they used explosive charges to blow a hole right through the enemy hull. What happened next was something that Hagrans would have nightmares about for generations. The Marines poured through the breach like water through a broken dam, and suddenly Admiral Krex found himself fighting humans hand to hand in his own corridors. The Hagrans were tough fighters who had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never faced anything like this. Humans had evolved on a planet where everything was trying to kill them. They were descended from people who had hunted mammoths with pointed sticks and survived ice ages that wiped out other species. Tom Bradley moved through the enemy ship like a force of nature. He had grown up in Detroit, where his father had taught him to box in the garage after school. The Hagran warriors were bigger than him, but size didn't matter when you were fighting someone who refused to stay down. Marine Corporal Danny Williams had played football in high school back in Texas. He treated the narrow ship corridors like a football field, using his low center of gravity to tackle Hagran soldiers twice his size. Private Kelly Murphy had grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, where she had learned to wrestle calves to the ground for branding. Hagran warriors discovered that all that experience translated very well to zero-gravity combat. The fighting was brutal, but swift. Within 30 minutes, Tom's team had fought their way to the bridge. Admiral Krex found himself staring down the barrel of a human weapon, held by creatures that looked like they had walked straight out of his worst nightmares. "Surrender," Tom said in his calm, steady voice. "Your fleet stands down now, or we take this ship apart, piece by piece." "Admiral." Krex looked into Tom's eyes and saw something that made his blood run cold. These humans weren't fighting for conquest or glory. They were fighting to protect innocent people, and that made them more dangerous than any weapon in the galaxy. "I surrender," he whispered. Within an hour, the remaining Hagran ships were fleeing into hyperspace, running away from the single human vessel that had destroyed their entire invasion fleet. The damaged Thunderstrike limped slowly toward Vega Prime, trailing debris and venting atmosphere, but still flying. As they approached the beautiful crystal cities, millions of Rilani people emerged to watch their saviors arrive. Elder Sina stood on the highest balcony of the capital city, tears streaming down her gentle face. Through her telepathic abilities, she had felt every moment of the battle. She had experienced the humans' determination, their refusal to abandon innocent people, even when it meant certain death. The galaxy had learned an important lesson that day. The most dangerous predators often made the most reliable protectors. The Deathworlders hadn't come to rescue the helpless despite their terrifying nature. They had come because of it. And somewhere out in the void of space, other bullies and tyrants heard the story and decided to find easier prey.